Okay, so today we're going to be talking about a variety of topics, and we're going to be kind of moving through those things kind of quickly. But the main topic that I want to focus on is the issue of monuments and memorials, and the controversy that's surrounding them right now in our country. To start off, I wanted to give you a dictionary definition of what exactly is a monument and what is a memorial. A monument is a statue, building, or other structure erected to commemorate a notable person or event. Similarly, a memorial is a statue, stone, etc., that is built in order to remind people of an important past event or of a famous person who has died. So keep those definitions in mind as we're talking through some of these things. As I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of controversy surrounding monuments and memorials in our country right now. People have been tearing them down and vandalizing them and all of that. I want to preface this by saying I don't agree with vandalizing anything and taking the law into your own hands and doing things that are illegal, generally. I don't support the way that these monuments have been removed, the way that it's been done, because people are not pursuing a legal path. And I guess you can argue that, well, maybe they tried and they were unsuccessful. So, I know that there's different arguments for that. I'm just saying I can't condone, I don't feel that I can condone someone breaking the law to take down a memorial or a monument or vandalizing it. But most recently, the monuments and memorials that have been pulled down have been in the days leading up to Indigenous Peoples Day / Columbus Day. Big shock, the Christopher Columbus monument was pulled down. There was also an Abraham Lincoln one that was pulled down and vandalized, and also a Theodore Roosevelt one. And so just to kind of go through these things, I think the Christopher Columbus thing is hopefully self-explanatory, but in case you weren't aware, Christopher Columbus, he didn't even discover the United States. And some people say he never even set foot in our country. He discovered the Bahamas, basically. He wanted to get to India, didn't realize there was a big landmass there in his way, accidentally ran into the Bahamas, and he didn't discover it because there were already indigenous people that lived there. And I think probably the most disturbing thing is, he himself documented his own exploits. He talks about enslaving people, raping people, killing people. And so this isn't a hearsay type of thing. This is something documented by him, as well as people who were with him who saw firsthand what was going on. So there's not a lot of argument there as far as his character and what kind of person he was. So I'm not really sure why we have a holiday after Christopher Columbus. I am in full support personally of it being replaced with Indigenous Peoples Day. And some states do observe it. And some states have different days that they've chosen to commemorate Indigenous people. So that is slowly changing, and we're seeing some good things come from that. So, but yeah, not a huge Christopher Columbus fan. So the Abraham Lincoln one, in case you didn't see the news or look at the pictures, so it was vandalized and pulled down. At the base of it, they took spray paint and put Dakota 38 on the bottom. They're at the base. The reason for that is apparently Abraham Lincoln was responsible for the hanging of 38 Dakota Indians. There was a violent conflict between the Dakota Indians and white settlers. And as a result of that conflict, he okayed the hanging of 38 Dakota Indians. So there's some hostility there towards him from indigenous people. The Theodore Roosevelt one honestly surprised me. I didn't know a whole lot of the history behind that. Apparently this is a quote from him. I didn't make this up. At one point, he said, I don't go as far as to think that the only good Indians are dead Indians, but I believe 9 out of every 10 are. End quote. So there you have it. A lot of stuff there. And so I think that's pretty self-explanatory as well as to why there is some hostility from indigenous people towards him. Back up from that, before all this, there have been being monuments torn down all over the country, and some of them have been in a response to the brutal murder of George Floyd at the hands of law enforcement. So, as a Southerner, Confederate monuments, particularly, are commonplace. We see them a lot. Stone Mountain, Georgia is a state park, I believe. And they have a famous light show, and they've had it for years. And people go and they take their kids, and it's school trips and things like that. Well, the lights, part of the show, they're illuminating the pictures and things of Confederate soldiers. So you can see why, that's, and honestly, they've had very little pushback until recently from that. It's kind of like, the Abbeville is kind of in my general vicinity. Abbeville, South Carolina, is a mecca of a lot of Confederate history and all that. I will let you look that up on your own. Suffice it to say, they have a substantial Confederate monument in the middle of their town square. I think it was erected for the first time in 1906, and then something happened, it caught fire or something like that, and it was replaced in like 1991. So it's been there a while. They've taken steps to preserve it. An interesting fact, though, in 1916, there was a man that was lynched in the square in Abbeville. His name was Anthony Crawford, and he was lynched because he refused to sell his cottonseed for less than what he thought it was worth. So he was tied up and dragged behind a wagon. He was stabbed, and he was shot over 200 times, and then his body was put up in the square for everyone to see. It was a horrific murder, unfortunately not uncommon for that time. And so I'm telling you that to say, in 2019, so last year, Abbeville County, or the city council, I guess, of Abbeville, decided to put up a memorial for him, and they detailed his life and the tragic end to it, and on the back of the memorial it details how South Carolina prior to the Civil War, their economy was tied up in slave ownership and plantations, and so, which is common knowledge too, but it kind of explains the history of that mentality and some other things. And so that's encouraging. I will say, it's unfortunate he was lynched in 1916, and it was over 100 years later before they put up a memorial for him, which to some people says, or it feels like, they're not taking responsibility for it and acknowledging it as part of their history. Whereas you have a large Confederate memorial, and that's very acknowledged. And so while we are taking steps in the right direction, I'm not going to bash it, because progress is progress and you got to take what you can get. But I do just want to point out, like, that's a serious inequality there. So the Confederacy, okay, during the Civil War, they were fighting to continue to have the right to own people, okay? Chattel slavery is exactly what it sounds like. They were treated as cattle, okay? They didn't have human rights. They were slaves for life. they had very little chance of being freed or earning their freedom. And their children were born slaves. That is something that is, from what I have read and done research on, it is unique to the Americas and slavery, both North and South America. The slavery in other parts of the world, in the more of the eastern part of the world, their children were not born slaves. This was unique, so doubly bad. And so because of that, obviously, if you buy a slave, you want them to have as many children as you can, because you want, the more children they produce, the more slaves you have. And so there was, forced breeding issues, among other like horrible brutality and atrocities. So those are the things, and keeping in mind that, yes, they're fighting to preserve this, and like, clearly, they had economic concerns because they didn't know if they could sustain themselves, especially seceded from the Union. And so I know there's some controversy. Well, the Civil War wasn't really about just slavery. There were other issues. Well, yes, there were other issues. But slavery was the driving force. Slavery was the main one. And that's largely agreed upon by most historians. So my opinion is that Confederate monuments help preserve and memorialize an evil mentality, that the people who fought on that side, they were willing to die for that. And I know that some people, particularly Southerners, can sometimes trace their heritage back to the Confederacy, and maybe a soldier, maybe one of their ancestors was a soldier who was killed during the Civil War. And to them, it can be very offensive, taking down monuments and, oh, you're going to forget history and all of that. And so I hear that. I can't say that I'm there, but I hear that and I see that. And so, and that's a hard thing. It's a hard thing to kind of come to terms with there. But give you some perspective, hopefully. If you go to Germany today, if you visit Germany, you're not going to see a Nazi swastika anywhere. It's illegal. You can't fly the flag. You can't have a bumper sticker on your car that displays the swastika, because it stands for something that everyone agrees upon is evil. So you can go in a Holocaust museum and you'll see a lot of swastikas because it's part of their history and they're not erasing it. But people can't fly the flag outside their house. Yet in the South, we see a lot of people flying the Confederate flag outside their house. And Confederate monuments are supposed to be okay. Another little bit of maybe of some perspective is Israel, where a lot of Jewish people live. The capital and the Holy Land, and all of that surrounding the Jewish faith. There's no statue of Hitler. Like the Hitler that killed 6 million Jews during the Holocaust. They don't need a statue of Hitler to remind them of their past. Like, they're very aware of that. And I think we would all agree that having a statue of Hitler in Israel would be ridiculous. Like, nobody would be okay with that. But yet again, here we are. We have these Confederate monuments. And so how is a person who knows that they're a descendant of slavery supposed to take that? How, should that shouldn't, I think our assumption that it's in the past and it shouldn't be offensive, I don't agree with that at all. It is offensive. And as white people, I'm white, obviously, we should be embarrassed that this was okay, that this was ever a thing. And me as a Southerner, I'm thinking, okay, let's debunk these stereotypes. I want to do better. I don't want everyone in the South to be perceived as ignorant, racist bigots. That's not my goal. Plus, it flies in the face of everything of God's heart and everything He says in His Word to me. So, as Christians, why are we so intent on, if you fall into the camp of wanting to preserve the monuments. Why are we so intent on preserving that part of history? Do we think that it's going to be that easily forgotten? And, let's look at our motives, and let's also think about how others are perceiving it and how hurtful and horribly offensive that can be. Just my opinion, and just if you do fall into that camp, just something to consider. Please comment if you have a respectful opinion or a view that maybe I haven't thought of. I'm interested to read your comments. Anything nasty or disrespectful or unkind will be deleted. So please keep it respectful. But I just challenge you to remember, like the Imago Dei, we are all made in God's image. God shows no favoritism. So when we know something is painful to our brothers and our sisters, when we know that it makes them feel a certain way, even if we personally aren't there and feeling the shame and feeling like, oh, I don't want this to be representative of who I am, maybe at least we can see how it affects others and have compassion. And as far as it depends on us, live peaceably.